Let's talk about Tanya, who is honestly a badass. She is the leader of the Denali Coven in Twilight, which makes her a peer of Carlisle's. And her fascination with Edward is actually the least interesting thing about her. But just to clear this up very quickly, no, Tanya and Edward were never engaged. Edward never showed Tanya any interest. I'm going to give you the background on Tanya and her sisters and why I think they're total baddies. And then I will tell you about how Tanya and Edward engage in the books. And then you can decide whether Tanya should have had a better story. The original members of the Denali Coven are Tanya there on the right, Irina the traitor in the middle, and Kate on the left. The original leader of the Denali Coven was a vampire named Sasha. Tanya, born in the thousands in Slovakia, was actually Sasha's biological great niece. And Sasha was like, you know what? I'm a vampire and I'm bored and I'd like to start a little family. So she turned Tanya. Turns out Sasha really liked the female companionship. So when she saw the opportunity to turn Kate, she did. Again, Kate was also born in the thousands in Slovakia. And she was a warrior who protected a highborn female. And Tanya and Sasha attacked the caravan, which Kate was like in charge of protecting, and they slaughtered everyone except for Kate. Like Kate managed to stay alive, and so they were like, we like her. She should be part of our family, and also she kind of looks like you, Tanya. Lastly, Sasha turned Irina, born at the same time and place. She was just a pretty peasant girl, and Sasha again like really thought that she looked like Tanya and Kate. Sasha really liked the idea of like building up this family of vampires where they could kind of pretend like they were related biologically, and they all really did love each other as sisters, and they loved Sasha as a mother. Sasha took great pains to explain like the Volturi to them and the vampire rules, and they were all very rule abiding. And that's why it was very shocking when it was revealed that Sasha had actually made an immortal child. She did this without Tanya's or Kate's or Irina's knowledge so that they could not be implicated. But the Volturi came and they did execute Sasha for this. I think in the movie, like they just show Jane like throwing this little child into the fire. And even though Tanya and her sisters totally understood why the Volturi did it and they agreed that Sasha had broken the rules, like they were devastated to lose their mother. All of them were devastated, especially Tanya. Tanya feels like there's an immense hole in her life. And in order to fill it, she and her sisters start engaging in flirtations with human men. They were trying to distract themselves from the loss, but they also really just enjoyed human male companionship, which go girly pop. But they would inevitably end up usually unaliving the men that they had these flirtations with because the blood was just like too overpowering for them. Tanya was actually the first of the women to become sensitive to the deaths of the men that they were involved with. The other women did as well. And it really started to depress Tanya. She was kind of like losing her friends, right? Like when she would accidentally unalive them. The death started to actually remind her of the loss of Sasha. So she decided to just like give up human companionship completely for a while. This led to inevitable loneliness. And so she was like racking her brain to try to think of how she could have her romantic pursuits with her male friends and keep them alive. She thinks about it and she thinks about it and she eventually realizes that like the fact that she's drinking human blood all the time is not helping at all when she's then so close to her human friends. So she decides, without knowing Carlisle or his lifestyle at all, that she will try animal blood. Kate and Irina were like, yay, this sounds like a great idea. And all three of them tried it out and they perfected themselves over a couple of centuries and ended up maintaining a self-control that would rival Carlisle. But what I think is cool about this is this was not really born out of like a cult-like moral superiority that we see with the Cullens. They did this because they genuinely enjoyed being around human beings and just like didn't want to lose their friends anymore. I don't think they think they're better or more morally superior for not drinking human blood anymore because they are predators. This was a practical solution so that they could not be lonely. You know that Kate does end up with a vampire though. And our girly Paparina certainly tried. So what of the Tanya and Edward of it all? Like, was there actually a relationship? What was the deal? And Tanya, as the leader of the Denali Coven, like met up with Carlisle and they realized like, oh my God, we each have these families that operate with similar beliefs. Wouldn't it make sense for Tanya to be interested perhaps in the one Cullen who is unpartnered for whatever reason? The word that Stephanie uses to describe her and her relationship with the Cullens and her relationship to Edward is persistent. So persistent that this is the reason that the Cullens actually never settled in Alaska with the Denalis. Does this mean that she was actually harassing Edward, or does this mean that she was having thoughts about being hugged by him like Jessica Stanley did? The world will never know. But when he runs away from Bella and we find out where he goes in Midnight Sun, kind of like right after first meeting her in the biology class, he goes to Alaska. There's this fun scene in Midnight Sun where Edward's just like moping in Alaska, like sitting in a snowbank. And like Tanya comes up and like does this like gymnastic thing and like cannonballs into the snowbank next to him. It like covers him in snow and he's like displeased. And she's like, I'm sorry, it was supposed to be a joke. And he's like, it was funny, just like a loser. And she basically says to him, like, I'm not used to rejection. When she says that to him, she starts like thinking in her head about like all the conquests she's had, which of course Edward is privy to these thoughts. And like you can see why Edward wouldn't want to be with Tanya, because he can read her thoughts. And I'm sure in his mind, he thinks that she's sullied, even though she's been just living her life for 1,000 years. What else is there to do, sir? I'm sorry that you've been playing the piano for the last 80 years and like pressing wildflowers and not thinking about intimacy at all. But I do think there's kind of like a slut-shaming element to it. Edward never says this, but like we know how he thinks of Jessica Stanley and like her rancid fantasies. Imagine somebody wanting Edward who has a past. And then basically she's like, when you showed up here, I thought you changed your mind. And he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't. And then she's like, you should go back to Carlo, though. And she's the one who encourages him to go back and face the situation. And like, that's it. Like, that's all we get of Tanya, aside from an eclipse when Rosalie tells Bella, oh my God, there were all these females up in Alaska and Edward like never cared about them. Like, that is it. And yet in every fan fiction, the villain is always named like Tanya. Tanya is looked at as this like homewrecker when she never once tried to like meddle in Edward's relationship with Bella ever. Like she's just a baddie who figured out a new way of life for herself and her sisters so that she could continue doing it.